Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and thank you all for being here, especially you. My name is Kim Blyer-Woods. I'm a social studies teacher here at Concord High School. I worked with a group of people who were dedicated to planning events today in honor of Concord High School social studies teacher Christa McAuliffe on this day, the 30th anniversary of the Challenger tragedy. As someone who grew up in Concord, I remember the excitement and the energy in the days and months leading up to the launch that we all felt. We followed Christa, a young, charismatic teacher, on her journey, and we can all remember exactly where we were 30 years ago as we watched her dream take flight. We can also tell you exactly how this tragedy affected each of us. It's because of these memories that members of the Concord High Social Studies Department felt it important that we plan an intimate and meaningful series of events today to remember Christa McAuliffe. The panel is here as our first part of the day, and social studies teacher Allison Aquilini will explain the panel and its goal in a moment. After this, the American Women's History class, who's here with us today, they will move on to a portable planetarium that's here. And then we have 2 Earth and Space Science classes that will also have the opportunity to sit inside the planetarium so that we can honor Christa's dream and her excitement of space travel in that way. At 9:30, we have school-wide announcements, and on those announcements, there will be an 18-minute documentary honoring Christa and her life. At the conclusion of the documentary, every student and staff member at Concord High School will have the opportunity to fill in their own dream in honor of Christa's dream on a piece of paper that has a star, and those stars will all be posted in the hallways throughout the entire building. At approximately 11 o'clock today, some members from the Veterans of Foreign Wars in Framingham, Massachusetts will arrive. They have an American flag that is scheduled to permanently fly at the Christa McAuliffe Library in Framingham, Massachusetts. That library is to be dedicated sometime this spring. What's significant about this flag is that it has already flown at several sites that are important to Christa and her life. It has flown at the United States Capitol building. It has flown at Johnson Space Center, where she trained. It has flown at Kennedy Space Center. This morning it will fly at Marion High School, where she went to high school. Then it will come here, and then it will go to Framingham State University, which is where Christa went to college. Upon arrival this morning, we will raise the flag at our flagpole out front. At 11:38, the time of liftoff of the Challenger, we will take that flag and move it to half-mast. We'll leave it there for 73 seconds, which was the duration of Christa's flight. At that point, the flag will be taken down. A member of the Concord High Band will play taps, and the members of the VFW will take that special flag away and hold on to it until it can be raised over the Christa McAuliffe Planetarium this spring. Lastly, the group has a plan to collect some memorabilia and create a permanent display in honor of Christa here in the building, and we'll be looking to dedicate that sometime during next school year. So with that said, I turn the floor over to Miss Allison Aquilini. She's the newest member of the Concord High Social Studies Department, and she is lucky to be teaching American women this year. She's going to talk a little bit about the class and explain the panel a little bit more.
All right. Hi, everybody. I feel like it's necessary to start out with, if you're in Period 1 American Women's History, this is where you're supposed to be. I am Miss Aquilini, and I am your teacher. They haven't met me yet. So, welcome. Like Miss Blairwood said, this is my first year at Concord High, and so far I've been having a great year. And I'm really excited to be teaching American Women's History and getting to know all of you. The class itself is a history class, but it also has a history of its own that's embedded in the history of Concord High School. The course is a really important part of Christa McAuliffe's legacy. She once said, "I've always been concerned that ordinary people have not been given their place in history." And I believe that this concern was the very reason that she created the American Women's History course at Concord. Each year at Concord, this class meets to honor ordinary women who have sometimes unknowingly accomplished extraordinary things. Each year that the course lives on, Christa's idea endures, and we get to remember what an extraordinary person and teacher she was. Although this is an unorthodox way to start a brand new course, we felt we could not ignore that the first day of the very course Christa created happens to be 30 years to the day after the Challenger launch. The panel we have gathered today is here to honor Christa's memory and ensure that her adventurous spirit lives on. This is a unique opportunity to speak with people who knew her as a colleague, as a teacher, and as a friend. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Welcome American Women's History. I am going to turn over the mic to Lori Gordon and Helen Dugan.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here today. It's such an honor to be here today. Even though now I'm a librarian, I'm actually in a wonderful company of women. Several of us who have taught the American Women's History course have combined together to put this event. Kim has taught it, I've taught it, Lori's taught it, Glenn Ring has taught it. And so it's just a credible honor to be here all together to help Allison start teaching the course with all of you. So I'm going to be introducing our panel, and we're going to be getting discussions underway in the next few moments, but I want to let you know who we have joining us today. Jane Voth is a current CHS science teacher and was here in 1986. Tom Herbert was a social studies teacher, now retired, but was here, member of the department that Christa was a member of. And then we have, I'm sorry, I forgot the order of where everybody's sitting, Kristen Jacques, who was a student at the time in 1986. Were you a senior or junior? You're a senior. Scott Reynolds, also a CHS graduate from 1986 and was a student here. And Tracy Wood. Was a student here in 1986. So you'll have a wonderful perspective of people who were students just like you, but 30 years ago. And Sue Capano is a math teacher who knew Christa. She's now retired, but has joined us here today. Lisa Boffinger is a science teacher here at Concord High, and Ralph Jimenez, who is a Concord Monitor reporter and editor. He was the science reporter in 1986 and covered that aspect of Christa's journey, informing the public about all of the science behind the shuttle and the launch. So thank you so much, all of you, for giving your time today, and would you, all of you please give them a warm welcome for joining us. And so if we could, just to get started, we thought what might be helpful, the students have questions and we'll get some conversation going, but if each of you wouldn't mind just giving maybe a brief statement about kind of your connection, either to events, to Christa, to the high school, how you see yourself connected to this particular anniversary. Would you mind starting us off?
In 1986, I was a new teacher here at Concord High School, and I had just gotten out of grad school, and I wanted to get into Concord High because it's a place people wanted to teach. And I knew about Christa McAuliffe because I had heard about the Teacher in Space competition, and she was already a celebrity when I arrived that fall. I was a new teacher, and she was very busy. But what I remember about her is, although I was in science and she was in social studies, she always had time. She was very approachable, very engaging, very sunny woman. And I sat next to her once in a lunchtime, and she taught me how to use journals. She thought that people should capture their memories, that ordinary people had really good ideas about what's happening to them, and write everything down, Jane. So as a brand new teacher, the few times I saw her, one of the things I still use and ask my daughter to do is journal. Lovely woman, and lucky to spend some time with her.
I was social studies department chairman at the time, and Christa had asked me if it was okay to apply for this. I said, sure, no, you're not going to win, you know. And I guess my thinking is, if you want to know about Christa, don't make her into Sister Teresa. She wasn't a saint. She was late for meetings. She got bored with meetings. I remember one time we went to a conference, a law conference, because we were both teaching you in the law down in Manchester. And we got about halfway through the conference, and she leans over to me and says, "Tom, you bored?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Let's skip out. Let's go to Toys R Us. I got to get some Christmas presents for the kids." So that's what we did. And so she wasn't perfect. She had toe jam just like all of us. She had belly button lint just like all of us. And I think that's one of the things you want to remember about her, is she was a regular person, not a saint. She is a really, really good teacher. But she wasn't the best that I'd ever seen. But that's okay, because she's just like us. And I think that's what you want to remember.
I'm Kristen Jakes. I had, Christo and I was a junior in '85 for a law class, and she was a very dynamic teacher. She reached out to all kids to make sure all kids were participating and involved with the class. She was very enthusiastic and engaging as a teacher, and that was really fun. One piece was we got to hear her experience of applying for the Teacher in Space program, how she barely made the deadline, ran out of her house in her pajamas to get to the post office so that it was postmarked in time, so that she could qualify. So it was a really fun process to witness, to watch, and experience sort of with her. Had a very sad ending, but she was a wonderful person to know.
I was a junior when all that happened. I actually never had Christa as a teacher, but I'd known Christa because she was also a teacher at the school I'd come from prior to Concord High. So I had known her for about 7 years. My sisters had both had her as teachers, and I was friends with a lot of the 86 class. And I remember the first time I had heard anything about it was when I was waiting for one of my buddies to finish class or finish the school day, and he was hanging out in a classroom with her, and they were going over the interview questions and the questionnaire, and she was like, hey, what should I put for this? I mean, she took that questionnaire, from what I could tell, so blasé and so not seriously. And I think that's one of the reasons she got picked was, she wasn't trying to script the answer that she thought they wanted. She was just putting what she thought she wanted to say, and the kids were having a good time helping her answer questions, and she was a really good teacher. But I agree. I think we got to make sure we personalize her and not martyrize her. She was just a nice person.
My name is Tracy. I was a senior in 1986. That fall, I had a law class, and I was supposed to have Christa McAuliffe, but schedules changed real quick, and I ended up not getting to have her as my teacher that year. I was very disappointed because of all the things I had heard about her as a teacher and as a person. But through the process of her applying and going through everything with the whole Teacher in Space program, it always impressed me at how much she involved the entire community with what she went through. It wasn't something she did on her own. She made it something that all of her students were part of. It was something that all of Concord High was part of. And she just took something that to us was so incredibly big and made it something that your average everyday person could just do. And she made it seem like no matter who you are, there's nothing you can't do. Just try. And she was just such a great, real person. I think probably the most genuine person I have ever known.
Chris, I taught math at Concord High, and there was only this building at the time. The other building hadn't been constructed yet. And Christa, social studies was on one end of the building, math department and foreign language was on the other end of the top floor. And so I interacted with Christa once in a while, and I found out early on she was a real type A personality. She knew what she wanted, and she went for what she wanted. She had an aggressive nature, and we found out in the news, like everybody else in America, in July, that she had been the one that was picked. I remember a couple stories about it. One of them was that the 10 finalists, I think it was 10. Told their handlers that they didn't want to be surprised by who was chosen. They had to be told ahead of time before they went before the cameras who the winner was, because they didn't want to do that surprise thing. And the handlers agreed to it and told them it was going to be Christa. And then school started in the fall, and she showed up. She was down in Houston, and she had told her people, you guys got to fly me up to New Hampshire. And they said, no, we're in training here. And she said, you have to fly me to New Hampshire. It's the first day of school. I got to be there. And they did. And she came up, and it was the teacher's day, and she visited with us, and we talked, and we gave her a present, a globe, so she could find her way home again. And then I think she stayed around the next day too for when the students came back, but I don't have a good recall of that. But she knew what she wanted, and she told the people what they needed to do.
I'm Lisa Boffinger, and I, like Jane, was a very new teacher. It was my second year. So I, as Jane, didn't know Christa well, and I think she was certainly warm to the new teachers like Jane and I. The biggest message I took away from the whole event was really the sense of community that Christa imparted to the school before the event, that the school was part of the whole training and what she went through and the excitement before, and really the sense of community after the event, that what happened in the school following the tragedy, that how the school pulled together after the event was a remarkable thing. That was a real lesson that we all learned, what can happen and how people can come together when something like that happens. That following a real loss like that people really can grow together. That was the real lesson I learned from it. And it's terrible that Christa had to lose her life from that, but the school really came together, and I'm sure that you guys, as students, I know as an adult, I learned a lot from it, and I'm sure the kids who grew from that also. One of the other things that I found remarkable, and you guys as adults now call her Christa, but I remember all the letters we got from across the country from school kids. And all the school kids, these little first graders, would get these letters, and the little school kids would be calling her Christa. But at the time, you guys all called her Mrs. McAuliffe. Yes. And it was this funny thing where little kids from all over the country were calling her Christa. But our high school kids, which were big kids, were calling her Mrs. It's Mrs. McAuliffe. I don't know who these kids are who are calling this woman Christa, but that's not who it is. This is Mrs. McAuliffe you're talking about. So that was a funny thing that happened.
Well, I'm Ralph Jimenez. As they said, I was the science columnist and chosen to go down to the launch to report on the technology, the procedures, what went into building the shuttle, things like that. And so I knew Christa, but not well. I was friends with her husband and still am. We played a lot of pickup basketball together and knew the kids. And my perspective was, I guess, somewhat different. One, because we had another reporter, let me back up, Bob Holler, who wrote a book about, it's called I Touch the Future, I Teach, about Christa. And he spent the whole year with her and her family. And so he knew her really, really well. And so we roomed together at a cheap motel outside Cape Canaveral for those few days at the launch, which, if you've seen pictures of it, Cape Canaveral's a big salt marsh right on the water, not that far from Orlando and Disneyland. But you see none of that there. It's isolated, and what I remember a lot about that is how cold it was. It was not Florida weather at all. It dipped into the low 30s and even the 20s, and it's also pretty much a big bird sanctuary. So you see birds constantly flying all around the launch site, which is an enormous tower, and around the buildings. One of which is where they assemble the shuttle is 15 or 20 stories high. It's just sits out there like this giant monolith. And So I didn't get back for the madness that Concord became, and the whole city did pull together from what I was told. We stayed the next night, stayed up all night and wrote. And the telling things for me were I grew up with NASA. I was an elementary school kid when Sputnik went up, if you've heard about Sputnik. And we were in the space race with the Russians. And they separated out kids that they thought should be on a science fast track. And so I was among them and put into these stepped up classes. And that kind of space race became our life from about 6th grade on. And so I grew up with that. And I was also a college student when we landed on the moon for the first time. And I was standing with a whole group of friends on top of my apartment building and watching this. And you could also listen to it on the radio. The TV had it too, but we didn't have it on the roof. And I remember being furious when Alan Shepard, who's from New Hampshire, hit a golf ball on the moon. And I get it that it was a science lesson to show how gravity differs and how far a golf ball can travel in that kind of environment. But it seems so mundane for this object that's been centuries worth of poetry has been written about it. And here's this goofball hitting a golf ball on it. It just seemed really wrong to me. So that's the kind of perspective I brought to the launch. And like a lot of people of that era, you revered NASA. It was pretty much the can-do agency that never got it wrong. And at the launch, things started to go wrong in slow, maddening, dentist drill kind of ways that just gave you a real feeling of foreboding. Like, you know, they say this is risky, but maybe they didn't tell us everything. And we all learned much later that they didn't tell us everything. That essentially NASA's ego got in the way and in many respects cost Christa her life and the other astronauts, because there were engineering reports that described little O-ring, which is like a faucet washer really, but on a giant scale, that's meant to keep the incredibly hot gases that propel the capsule forward from going out, and none of it coming back in where it could ignite the fuel. And what they learned and had been warned about is that the temperatures that it was that day, that O-ring stayed stiff and brittle and couldn't flex. So as metal and everything flexed, some of the superheated exhaust gas went back into the booster and ignited it, and that was the big explosion everyone saw on their TV. And I was with other journalists and teachers and many people from Concord at the 3 mile line, which is as close as you could get to the shuttle for safety reasons. And also, we didn't have hearing protection, the NASA workers did, but it was just deafening. I mean, and as I wrote in what I wrote over that night, that the shuttle shook the earth goodbye for the last time. And it really does shake the earth, and the stands were like bleachers, were trembling, and with this, and then this enormous roar. So there's, way beauty and excitement, and then also chaos, because you can't speak to the person next to you; it's too loud. So that's the kind of the scene at the event that I was watching. And as I said, I knew the timetable, what was supposed to happen second by second as the boosters dropped away. And I knew what happened wasn't in the script. And at first I thought with some others that the flight had been aborted, meaning they had an alternate landing site on the other side of the Cape, that if it looked like it was going to be successful, they could, in theory at least, re-land the shuttle without getting into space. But the trajectory was wrong for that too. So I and another guy who was 20 years older and had been a science writer for a lot longer and covered many launches, said it's not coming back. So I knew, I was among the first people to know in the crowds. I could look down and see, just the Christa McAuliffe's mother with her hands over her mouth in horror, and everybody hoping for the best but fearing the worst. And the other thing, we didn't have the technology, obviously, that you do now. There were no cell phones. My computer, as I wrote, was the size of a small sewing machine, and it weighed about 30 pounds. And NASA put us, all the press, and there were hundreds and hundreds of reporters and scientists there, in a big dome shaped roughly like the Everett Arena, bigger than the Everett Arena and more a true Bucky Fuller dome. And it was just, it's Florida. It's not insulated. It's just a couple thin layers over an aluminum structure. And at some point, somebody in the reporters section yelled, "It's coming back!" And people were afraid that we were all going to get incinerated in this thing too. And I thought about that for just a second, but then I also thought about how hard it had been for the day or two before before the launch, when we were waiting as it was delayed and delayed and delayed over and over again. It had been to get a phone line out. They didn't have nearly as many telephone lines, and in those days, to send a story you'd written on a computer at any distance, you had to put these rubber couplings on the phone, and it would actually record the clicks and beeps and translate it digitally into what you were writing, and it was a slow process. And back up just a second, one of the most chilling moments for me was there's icicles hanging from the launch tower, which just didn't look right. And as they were trying to close the door that the astronauts went in through, including Christa, a bolt was stuck, and they had to replace the bolt. It wouldn't slide into the little ring or whatever it is. They couldn't see at that distance it was supposed to go in. I don't remember now. And so they sent, and they were having trouble getting it back out to try another one. So they sent for a cordless drill, and they were new in that day, and because you couldn't afford a spark around all this fuel. So they couldn't use a regular electric drill. So they sent a cordless drill, and it seemed like forever as this technician is drilling up on the tower on the bolt to the door. And the battery died on that drill. And then they sent for another drill. And when that drill got there, the battery was already dead. And you're thinking, this is NASA. What's going on here? And it was just a very bad feeling. So anyway, after the explosion, when I realized what happened, I just started running, because I knew that if we didn't get a telephone line right away, we wouldn't get one all day. No one was ever going to give up their telephone line to their radio station or paper or TV station once they got it. So I was one of the first people back at the big press dome, and I called the Monitor and described what we'd seen. And Bob Holler stuck around, went down on the field, talked to the McAuliffes and others, and started doing his job. And some reporters broke down and couldn't work. Others, and that's most of them, snapped into professional mode. So I didn't think about Christa per se and the tragedy. I thought, I've got to tell this story. So that's what we did. We sent a brief report, out, because the Monitor came out at about 1 o'clock. And this didn't make it into today's paper, but it's a funny scene that we were writing more slowly than the Associated Press. And at the time, and papers still have trouble with drivers, and Mike Pride, the editor, had me on the phone. Holler was still coming back, and we switched seats, and he started typing as we were both kind of dictating the story. And I'm on the phone with Mike, and he said, "You've got 5 more minutes. If you don't get the story here, I'm going to run the Associated Press version, because if we're late again, the drivers will quit." And I said, "Mike, if you run the AP story, I'm going to hang up this phone, and we won't get out for the rest of the day, maybe not even tomorrow." And so I called his bluff, and we ran our story and not the AP story. But it's just another little moment of madness in this historic moment. And
Thank you
like,
for sharing all of that, Ralph. That's it gives us a real insight to what it was like to be there that day. I know that the students are anxious to ask some questions, so if you don't mind, I'm going to turn some things over to them to let them ask you some things about the Teacher in Space program and Christa and just all kinds of things that they are looking to say. Is there anybody who'd like to go first, or shall I call on someone? Thank you, Brinkley. Just remember, you got to talk into the microphone. Yeah, thank you.
So, Mr. Menez, you talked about how the explosion shook the earth, or shook the world. So, how did it shake Concord, and what was it like to have Concord thrust into the spotlight after the explosion?
See, I'm the wrong person for that, as would be Bob Holler, and some of the people here would know that much better, because we stayed for another 2 days at Cape Canaveral. And I went around and interviewed as many scientists as I could find, and others. And there were press conferences and hearings almost constantly with updates. At the time, John Glenn, who was a senator but also an astronaut, came down, and they'd already started forming committees to investigate what had gone wrong. So we didn't see the zoo in Concord. Mike Pride has written about it and talked about how the press particularly were really showing their worst behavior, the worst of pack journalism, because at St. John's, for example, at what I think was a memorial service, again, I wasn't here, they had to yell at TV cameramen for standing on the pews and filming everything, and people were shoving microphones in people's faces and not particularly respecting their feelings. So that's what I heard when I got back, and others have written about it. You can probably find it in archives.
Do you want to know what happened here at school?
Yeah, the school itself was a zoo.
School was dismissed at 11 o'clock that day. They brought in the buses and they sent everybody home, except for the staff. And then the next day there was no school for kids. The staff came together and met in what's now Commons D area, which then was the library and media center. And we worked together to try to figure out a plan on the best way to deal with this. Because you have to understand, and it was in the article in today's paper, but this had been a zoo. Media people were coming in every day wanting to interview people, wanting to talk to people. I told Kim about when Newsweek came in to do a expose on Christa. They rearranged all the desks because Christa had them in a circle. Well, that's not the right way we want to perpetuate the image of education, so they put them in rows. And then they took down all the Time magazine covers that were around the room, because this was a Newsweek story. But then the kids came on Thursday, and they could go any place they wanted to go when they wanted to go. They could go play basketball. They could go to the media center, which was being set up as sort of a grief central. It's where all the cards were posted from all around the country, from around the world. We had a telegram or a card that went around the whole circumference of the media center from children in China. And I just want to reiterate, you have to understand that 6 weeks before this, we'd had a shooting in school and a student was killed right around the corner. And Christa wanted to come home to be with us, but she stayed. And so we were on pins and needles after that shooting, trying to hold each other together. And then to have this happen on top of it was just a big clunk. And I remember personally, it was either Thursday or Friday, I went down to the media center to check on somebody. Because kids could, like I said, check out of class, just say, I'm going to the media center, I need some space. That was fun. I walked into there, and suddenly the reservoir opened. And I started crying. And somebody, I don't know who, but I wish I did, a student saw me just standing in the middle, just crying. She came up and she just put her arms around me. And we just stood there. And for the life of me, I wish I knew who it was so I could thank them, because it meant so much to me. But as a staff, and you got to think about the administration that's trying to deal with this whole thing. It was an incredible team effort on the part of the faculty and the students just to be together. And that went on for the rest of the year. I mean, we were dealing with it for the rest of the year. And staff members, we didn't have a summer vacation. When we came back that fall, it was like we just left school the day before, because we didn't have time to process what had happened. I'll shut up, I'm talking too much.
Now, let me just continue what you said, but that was the sense of how the building was. It didn't, there was no separation. Obviously, there's a separation between students and staff and administrators, but it didn't make any difference. You saw students comforting students, you saw students comforting staff, you saw staff comforting staff, you saw administrators comforting. I mean, we were all equal. We all shared the same thing. It was an amazing place. This building was an amazing place. And somewhere, I hope you guys were able to find all those letters and they came, because they have to be somewhere. I can't imagine someone threw them out.
They're saved at the tech.
They're at the tech.
Yeah.
There are boxes and boxes. I remember at one point, this is how ridiculous we all were. We thought we were going to respond to them all. Right. Do you remember that?
I responded to them. I was a 6th grader at Concord School.
We
responded to
them. You didn't respond to all of them.
Not all of them.
Yes, yes, that was the idea when they started coming in. Oh yes, we'll respond to all of them. And then they just kept coming and coming and coming.
Remember the hallways, they were plastered with all of these posters and letters and everything from all over the world. I remember particularly that morning, again, the press was here. They were all over the building. We had every news van that you could possibly imagine parked around the building. And there was a lot of us down in the cafeteria. And at that time, we were one of the only schools that had cable TV installed in all the classrooms, so we thought we were, pretty important. That we actually had TV sets in the classes, but in the cafeteria there was a huge group of us watching, and when we realized what had happened, and the shock was just hitting everybody, I remember hearing principal at the time come over the loudspeaker and ask that all of the press and the news people please leave the building, and said, this is private property, we need you to leave. And some of them did and some of them didn't. And I remember very clearly watching the football team clean out the cafeteria and remove these people who did not want to leave and wanted to, how do you feel right now, asking all of the questions that people just could not answer at that time, and gently escorting them out of the building. And that was the time when you realized, we're all in this together. And, the only place we really wanted to be was here at the school. It was good to go home and be with your family and everything, but the place that I felt the most comfort was here with everybody else.
And keep in mind that the campus was different at the time. It was just this building, and the media center was down where the art department is now. And it was actually bigger than our current media center downstairs here. And it had counters and had all the stacks, but it had counters that went all the way around. It had a huge 2-wall bank of windows on those two sides. And there were shelves, counters all around there, all around that place. And when Tom talked about going down to the media center, standing in the middle and breaking down, it was because there were people, the school sent posters, and all the kids in a class would sign a poster, and they put them all around the walls on the media center, on the glass and everything, and the flowers.
Oh my
That's
God.
right.
There were huge floral displays, and they started coming in, and they put them up on some of the shelves, and they kept coming in and kept coming in, and you walked in there, and it was a flood of flowers. They ran out of space to put these huge floral arrangements.
Do you remember the smell?
Yeah.
The smell was overwhelming.
Absolutely. Absolutely incredible. And you couldn't go anywhere in the school without all the commotion of everything that was going on. It was amazing.
People trusted everybody. It wasn't like you had to have a pass to go to the media center. You just went. I mean, it was just, we were in this together. There was no outsiders. We were all together.
At one point, the school organized a memorial service that we held in the gym.
President Reagan offered to come and do it, and Charlie turned him down.
That was
Said,
our
we'll handle it
principal.
ourselves. Thank you very much.
Charles Foley was our principal at the time.
It was, the whole school was there. It was an opportunity for people to get up and share how Christa had touched them, and it was an extremely emotional time. It was very wise of the administration to put something together like that for the students. It gave us a place to vent, and it was really well done.
And there was a reporter who had snuck in. And he was hiding under the bleachers.
I remember that.
No.
Football team.
Yeah. We got him out.
But right after the event happened, and they asked the press to leave campus, Charlie Foley knew that he needed to make a statement to the press, and so there was a reporter from WMUR in Manchester who was a Concord High graduate, and he called her back onto the campus and gave his report to her. What was her name?
Can't remember.
She
That
ended
comes
up.
with age.
She ended up at CNN, didn't she?
Yeah,
Down
I know,
in
right.
Judy Fortin.
Judy Fortin. Yes, thank you.
One of my students.
And so that's who he gave his statement to, was a Concord High grad.
Do you remember when we'd go out of the building and they'd be lined up around the block, and you'd hear the cameras clicking and everything, and they'd yell to you, what's your name? Can we put, can you answer a question? And so we would just come to school and we'd just stay inside, just to stay away from them. They were really
There was no building over here, you know that. So this was a field. Helicopters were landing in the field from news broadcasters, wanting to get people here fast. And I'll share with you just a funny story, and then I'll shut up again. That Thursday, I was a rope teacher. And that Thursday we had rope. And in the class were some of the big student leaders. I mean, I had 5 members of the girls' state championship field hockey team in that class. And they were also the leaders of the school. Chiara Dolcino, Catherine Hoke. I mean, it went on. And I said, what do you want to do for class today? And they said, we want to go thank WKXL for their sensitivity and coverage. I said, but there's reporters lined up out there. We had a police barricade to keep the reporters off. And the reporters were all lined up over by the store over there. And I said, well, how are we going to get through there? Because they're going to bombard us with questions. And they said, we got to think about this. I said, okay, I got an idea. How many of you speak Spanish? And about 5 or 6 people raised their hand. And I said, how many people speak German? Because I had a German exchange student in the class, and 4 people raised their hand. I said, how many people speak French? Some more people raised their hand. I said, anybody know how to speak Pig Latin? And a couple of people said, no, what the hell is Pig Latin? And so I told them what Pig Latin was, and they said, okay, here we go. We're going to KXL. We're going to walk down the driveway, and the reporters are going to come running to interview us. When I say go, start speaking to each other in your new language. And we started down the driveway, and here they come, this horde of reporters circling us. I said, now's the time, guys. Out comes this various languages, and the reporters just stopped and looked at us. Who are these people? But we needed to have a laugh. It was okay to laugh at that time. And we went down to KXL, thanked him, and walked back, and the reporter saw us coming, and you could see him say, oh, don't interview them.
Do we have another question from another student? Somebody else who'd be willing to ask us something? Piper, I think you had a question.
Oh, yeah,
I forgot about that.
Son of a gun, how did you find it on the floor?
So some of the CHS alumni are organizing a campaign to make January 28th a holiday. I was curious as to how you guys felt about that.
Well, let me tell you the historical nature of us recognizing the 28th was that each year after the 86, we had a 1 minute of silence at the time, 73 seconds of silence at the time of the explosion, and we did that for the next 3 years, and then on the 4 years, and on the 5th anniversary, we had an event an all-school event, if I remember right, and it was determined that was going to be the last major event that we had because there weren't any of the students that knew her there anymore. And so then after that, there wasn't an annual event. And then on the 10th anniversary, we had another one. We recognized the 10th anniversary with an event. Jean, I think you were here at the time. No? Okay. And then after that, there might have been small events every 5 years. But and 5 years ago, we actually had a reunion of faculty members that were here at the time, but it got to the point where it was something that we were ready to put behind us, I think is the way it was.
I'd like to add, one of the things we wanted to be very careful of as a community at the time was we wanted to protect their family.
Exactly.
And this was devastating to us and a big loss, and we saw great things come from a miserable situation. But Concord put their arms around the school, and Concord put their arms around the family. We really wanted to protect her children, and her husband, and we didn't feel entitled to celebrate our grief in a way that would make them uncomfortable or make them go down a road they just weren't ready for. So one of the things that we have to remember as the people who are here, Lisa, I'm talking to you down there, this was an international event, and school children around the nation knew who Christa was, and they did talk about her as Christa. But those of us who were here are wary of and want to be very cautious about celebrating and recognizing some of the stuff that might upset the family, and that we just can't help it. That's who we were at the time. I recognize great ideas and a wonderful spirit, and the spirit of adventure, absolutely. But we were always worried that if the family's not doing it, then we're not entitled to make these statements or go public. Let's follow their lead. So when we seem like we're cautious, and I may be speaking only for myself, it's partly because of great respect for the family, and that will never leave, I don't think. So it's a great idea, but I would say find out what the family wants, if that's important. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Another question?
All right. So, the question's, what was Christa's training to be an astronaut like?
She loved floating in space in windless conditions.
She liked being in the Ziploc bags they were going to put them in case it got too warm. He had these sandwich bags. You put them in a bag and zip yourself in, and she thought that was cute. She was pretty sure she wouldn't be able to get out like a snowsuit in the second grade or something, but I remember she talked about those people baggies, lunch bags. Yeah.
Is that something, Ralph, that you would have reported on a lot?
More through Bob Holler and what he would tell me, but astronaut training was and still is really rigorous. So one of the big questions was, could Christa handle it? And because you really needed to be physically fit. You couldn't struggle with claustrophobia because you'd be basically strapped in and for long periods of time. And there are obviously the bathroom issues that everybody asked about all the time globally, and things like that. So the first challenges were probably physical and psychological, and then you also had to be able to really get along with people who are significantly different than you are. That was a fairly diverse crew, so those were all initial tests, but then the training itself was really long and involved, and I know they struggled with it again when John Glenn, as a senator, went back up. I think he was 80, and he went up for a short flight, and so that it got, as the technology got better, it sort of stalled, frankly, and never really evolved to the next phase of space travel, which is why they ultimately ended the shuttle program. And if you didn't know, 16 years after the Challenger disaster, I got a call. I was working for the Boston Globe at the time, and I was on at White Farm leading an outdoor event when I got a call from the Globe that I had to go to work because the space shuttle Columbia had burned up on re-entry and killed its 7 astronauts. So that combination pretty much put an end to the shuttle program for good. And our space program right now, I think, is in a bit of a state of chaos. It's been privatized, and the private sector is making really good progress. We've heard of Elon Musk and others, but they're back to having their failures. I think his last big rocket exploded. So we're relying on, to the madness of many in Congress, Russians for rocket engines and to service our astronauts and those of other nations on the space shuttle. So the NASA and the space program fell a long, long way, particularly after the Columbia disaster.
She liked the vomit rocket. She liked the vomit rocket.
Vomit Comet.
Oh, right.
Vomit
right.
Comet?
Yep.
Yep.
You might have to explain to the students a little
Airplane.
what that is.
And you're sitting in it and it dives and suddenly you become weightless and you're floating around in there and then they pull up. What? It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get graphic just because.
That's the only way you can experience true weightlessness. It's not the same as being in water. And so they got this plane. They emptied the whole content of it out. It was a hollow plane, and they would take you up and they'd dive bomb. And for a few, I don't know what period of time,
It's about 30 seconds, I think.
10 seconds, you floated. And that was how you found out how you were going to react to weightlessness. And that was how it got its name.
One of the things a couple students were wondering about back here, and I said I would ask for them, was just if you could fill in a little bit of the blanks for them, being a younger generation, of just what was this Teacher in Space program that got started under President Reagan. That's what Christa was applying for, and they don't know a lot about what that was.
Politics.
The space program was suffering. The space program was suffering. So President Reagan's idea to breathe new life into it was to put a civilian in space, and he chose a teacher because
It would look good.
Yeah.
And they needed funding for the space program.
And in fairness to NASA, at that point, it seemed like you were just landing, a regular 747. You had a very remarkable safety record. So just put a teacher up there. I mean, it wasn't a cavalier move. NASA had, at that point, a fairly substantially documented safety record they could be proud of.
When President Reagan announced this, he also said that his Secretary of Education, Bennett, was going to go around the country doing a lesson plan to show his support for education. And at the last minute, they said, oh, and he'll come to Concord High. And we were like, huh? And he's going to teach us how to teach. And so I was contacted by the advanced people, and they said he's going to want to do a unit on the Federalist Papers. And I said, well, we got a problem, because none of our U.S. history classes go back that far to the Federalist Papers. Well, that's what he's doing his lesson plan on. You can count on 50 minutes of the Federalist Papers. So we put our heads together, and we found that 2 of our students at Concord High had gone to St. Paul's School that summer and studied the Federalist Papers. I know, we got experts on the Federalist Papers. And so they came into room 3, what was then 304, which is a double-sized classroom. And we had said, no media. They said, we got to have media. So 1 camera was in there. And it was a regular class, like a Wilson to Clinton class or Wilson to Reagan class. And they were sitting there, plus our 2 ringers. They were sitting right in the front. And he started speaking, and he lectured on the Federalist Papers. And oh my God, this is the sure cure for insomnia. And this one kid in the front row leaned back with his head against the wall, sound asleep through the whole thing. And I was in and out because I was so embarrassed as a teacher watching this model lesson. And so the media was out in the hallway waiting for this thing to end. And so the bell rings and this kid just jumps. He's awake, he goes flying out the door, and a media guy sticks a microphone in his hand and says, "What'd you think of that?" And the guy looked down and said, "That was disgusting." I walked on down the hall. I caught up with the kid later and I said, "Good job." It was really bad. But that's the kind of stuff we have all the time. There's all kinds of requests for people coming in and demands being made on a school to juggle this and juggle that.
Could you describe to me where you were at the time of the event?
I was in the auditorium watching with a lot of kids from all different grades and staff members. It was kind of like a big party. And
The auditorium was packed.
yeah, it was
Balloons, confetti.
everything. Party hats, horns. It was really a great time. And growing up, we didn't watch launches. We didn't really know what they looked like. And when the Challenger exploded, we were still like cheering and having a great time. It took, I believe it was Mr. Pingree, to yell to quiet us down, to really let us know that there was a problem and that the Challenger had exploded. And then it was just like a deafening silence.
I was in the cafeteria, and I remember it taking a while for everybody to realize what had actually happened, and everybody thinking, how could this have happened? Nassau being Nassau, we never, ever thought anything would go wrong, let alone what did go wrong. They had the delays with the launches for a couple of days, and we had to keep waiting and waiting, and the anticipation was incredible. But I remember thinking at that time, that NASA had basically lied to us by not letting us know how risky it was and how much of a chance she was taking by doing what she did.
I was in a classroom. I want to. One of the former students, mentioned about that we were a school that had cable in the classrooms. That was because the cable company came and for free installed cable in every classroom of the building that we had. And then we brought television sets in from home because we didn't have enough TV sets, and we still didn't have enough of them. So I was in room 311, which was looking out on the back street here, and I had a class of 30 kids in there. It was Algebra 2, and there were 60 kids in the room because there was another classroom across the hall that didn't have a TV set. So they came in, and it was the only time I'd allowed two students per seat. That was a hard and fast rule of mine.
I remember that rule.
And so the two young ladies here were students of mine. and so I had 60 kids in there, some sitting on the floor, some doubling up in seats. We were close to the math and foreign language office, and the teachers that didn't have a class that period came in and stood across the wall in the back of the room. So I would guess there were about 70 people in that classroom that seated 30. And there was a TV on a monitor in the front of the room, and that's why we had cable.
Yeah, I don't remember the room number, but I was right near there. I was in a French classroom.
Right around the corner.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, my understanding, the cable was put in for this event, essentially to disperse the media, rather than having literally like 300 camera crews in one space. They figured they'd just disperse everybody. So I don't remember how many kids were in it. I assume they were adults, but I don't remember much. But we were just in our classroom watching a TV, and I remember I was a huge space shuttle buff at that time. That was the 51st flight. I'd probably seen about 20 of the flights before that. So I knew something had gone bad pretty quickly. I think it was a very different environment than the large auditorium. Like, it got quiet real quick in that classroom because it was a lot less chaos. But then it was just complete sort of mental chaos because nobody knew what to do. We were in an isolated room, floors away from most of the adults. The adults were in shock. We were trying to find out where our friends were and other things going on. And the news, they didn't know much. I remember one of the news crews in the TV talking about they think they see parachutes. And so everyone started cheering again. And I'm like, there's no parachutes in the shuttle. And so everyone got quiet again. And it was just sort of back and forth, up and down, up and down. It was a very surreal day.
I had a TV in my classroom as well, and it was just my one class in there, and it was very quiet if you only had one class in there, and the announcers just stopped talking. That's what I remember, and the kids stopped. It was like silence, and if you just had one small class, and there was the kids asked what happened, and luckily I hadn't watched very many shuttles launch. I knew something bad had happened, and so I just said, I think it's bad. And there was one student in there. I don't remember exactly who it was. I know exactly where he sat. I can picture where he sat, right in the middle of the room. And he said, it's bad. There's something very bad happened. And then in the announcers, it took them a while before they started talking about what they think happened.
And that went on for a while. And this is macabre, but you should know it, that one of the possibilities, a ray of hope, was that despite the explosion, the capsule that the astronauts were in would land in the ocean, and maybe some astronauts would survive. And then the other theory was that they all died pretty much instantaneously, essentially vaporized. And that's probably still debated in some circles, but there were reported recordings from inside the shuttle that proved that they didn't die at the moment of the explosion. And those have, to my knowledge, never been aired out of respect for the families and basically for all of our psyches, because hearing that probably just wouldn't help any. But that appears to have been the reality.
I was at the end of the hall on the third floor, out of class with another teacher, watching, because I had been bombarded by enough activity and stuff that I was just at the point where I said, okay, let's get this over and we can get back to normal. And when it blew up, the other teacher said, what happened? And I said, they're dead. We've got to get to the cafeteria right now. And that's where I ran to the cafeteria. What about you?
I was in a room with another teacher, about 60 kids, and my dad is an engineer at NASA, so I had actually seen some liftoffs in the past, and it didn't look normal to me. And you have to remember back in that 1986, we didn't have the electronics that you have, so you couldn't get on your phone and get information. You really had these long periods of silence, and you had to wait, and the kids they just sat totally silent and stunned. And one boy in the back, just like Lisa, I can remember right where he sat, he goes, what do you think they mean by exploded? They keep saying that it exploded. And I just turned around and just as calmly as I could, I said, I think they mean what you think they mean. I think they mean it exploded. And then we had these parachute theories, and hopefully it blew the capsule off into a nice, safe landing, you know, and all kinds of hopeful stuff. But I remember the blue sky in the television, and that room was silent, except for that little boy who kept asking me, just exactly how exploded is exploded. And I remember looking at that image and thinking, it's done, it's done. We waited, then I heard Charlie Foley, in the sternest voice I've ever heard him say, media, get out of here, leave us alone. I mean, just, it was very clear that the grown-ups in the building were taking charge and get out of our face. It was just a lovely man, very, very sweet, and I had never seen someone say with such conviction and on the verge of tears, get out, leave us alone. And then kids just started, their parents just came and got them, and they went home, and then we rallied downstairs and started to figure out, what do we do? What do we do? Yeah, same thing as many of you.
And the parking lot for faculty was right over here where the building is now, the new building. And so we had our parking there, and there was the practice field. And I don't know when, maybe some of you can help me, when did the police officers show up on campus to keep?
Right away.
Right away?
Jim McGonigal was the sergeant in charge. He was like a resource officer. And he had a crew, and they surrounded the building to keep all the media out.
And we got the kids out, and then we had a meeting in 304.
Yep.
And then we were dismissed, and they told us when we were ready to leave that meeting that there were officers around the building and that there were reporters that were still trying to sneak back onto campus. So you can be escorted to your car. And I thought, my car is 50 feet away from the building, really? And I stepped out down the lower doors, which was down by the cafeteria and gym, and there's an officer. Ma'am, can I walk you to your car? And I said, no, my car's right over there. I'll be just fine, thank you. But that's what they did for us.
And
they protected us.
One of the other stories from a couple of days after, I mean, they were filming.
Yes.
They were filming everything around the high school that could be put on cable vision. They had a camera over here and all the reporters over here. And Jim McGonigal, the sergeant, was in the building. His chief of police called and said, Sergeant McGonigal, are you aware that there is a Concord police officer drinking a cup of coffee at the bottom of the driveway? He said, yes, sir, I am. You know it is against our policy to have Concord police officers drinking coffee in public. It's just not good for the image. He said, yes, sir, I'm aware of that. So you will go down and you will remove that coffee. He said, with all due respect, sir, I will not do that. I just paused and he says, why not? Because that coffee was given to that officer by a Concord High School student, and he will drink it if it's cold. Because they're working to have the relationships which have been stretched out by the shooting come back together. And a couple of days later, a cop was standing guard up at Christa's house, right up here around the corner. And it's cold, and he's by himself, and Concord High kids delivered him pizza at midnight. Those are the stories that warm my heart, because those are people doing things out of the ordinary that you wouldn't expect, and yet here these 3 or 4 Concord High kids with a pizza just knocking on the window. And I remember the officer's name because I had his daughter in class.
We had a couple more questions that we're hoping to get in before the end of this period.
So my name is Kate Prentice, and I'm a senior this year. And what I was really wondering, I told a friend of mine who's from Ireland that I was going to be here today, and he goes, oh my God, we learned about that in school in Ireland, and he lives in Rhode Island now. And I was just wondering, you said you got letters from China and all over the world, and I was wondering if part of the reason you think, or have no idea perhaps, that the message of the teacher in space was so widespread was perhaps because she was a woman and women are seen to be more nurturing and such. And you say that she had such a sunny personality. I didn't know if that may contribute to why the program was so popular was because of her, not necessarily the idea that there's just a teacher in space.
I think the fact that it was going to be a civilian in space was a big factor that made it so newsworthy. The whole process of the application process, it was stretched out over a long period of time, so it was something that was in the news for a long time. She was going to teach from space. We were going to have sessions so that we could actually see her from space, from within the shuttle. So it was really a very broad program that they were trying to implement. I think the fact that a woman was selected, I think, did help. And I think the fact that she was the type of person she was, I think is really what made it as popular and as kind of in your face as it was, because she just let everybody be part of it from day one. We knew she was applying we knew, that she almost didn't get her stuff in the mail in time she just let everybody in the community be a part of it. And I think because she shared it and she made it our program, not just hers, I think that's why it gained the popularity that it did.
Yeah. Her personality just took over. Oh, not Stacy. Oh.
So I'm just wondering if, especially to the women on the panel, but I know the guys too, if it felt significant that a woman was chosen, and especially a woman who had, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think for these girls, they've grown up in a different society, really, than back then, 30 years ago.
I think it just sent a message that, here you are, a teacher, a social studies teacher in Concord, New Hampshire, in this little teeny tiny place, and now you have become an astronaut. You applied, you tried, you put in effort, and look at what you can do. And I think she sent a huge message to the women and the students here at the school that with the determination, you can really accomplish anything if you put your mind to it. It was like her, always saying, reach for the stars. Go ahead, because, you never know what you can do unless you try.
And look at the course she was teaching that's on the resume. Women in History.
And I think that there was a lot of publicity about it because NASA really wanted some positive publicity about it. And so it was hyped up to that. And of course, that they went for international publicity. And of course, a space shuttle had never had a problem before. So this was the first time, and that made international news.
I'm afraid the bell is going to ring on us any moment, and I'm so sorry to have to cut us off. And I want to thank you all so much for sharing your memories, your recollections, and your time with us this morning. And I'd really like everyone, before they run off to the next class, to thank our panel this morning. Thank you.